We have about 250 people already signed in and increasing. This session was reached maximum registration of 500 people, so I expect we'll get close to that soon. But it's 10:30 by my clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this session, a 6-week plan for reopening schools after COVID-19 with Lori Linus and Cher Anderton. My name is Mark McKechnie. I'm the Senior Consultant on Equity and Student Discipline at OSPI. And I want to thank our hosts and co-sponsors for the event, the UW Smart Center, Kaiser Permanente, and the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. I'm your host for this session, and I want to encourage those of you who are listening to put questions in the Q&A box, not the chat. We'll be monitoring the Q&A, and if you have technical issues, we may respond in writing, but we'll be collecting some of the most common questions for Lori and Cher to address at the end. They've asked, in the interest of time, that we hold questions toward the end, but we will have some time for Q&A at the end. I want to remind everyone that you can access all of the information that you probably are looking for on the MTSS Fest website. And I need to advance there we go. So here's the address. If you just go to the OSPI website and search for MTSS Fest, that's the easiest way to get there. But you will see this is probably where you went to register. And if you need clock hours, I want to remind everyone to register for those by the end of the day today. There's a link that says clock hours. There's also a link to the agenda and registration, and that's where you'll find the materials for this session and other sessions that you may be listening to today. It's my honor to welcome Lori Linus and Cher Anderton to present today. Lori is the owner and executive director of Sound Supports, whose mission is to support every student and every school through the use of a multi-tiered framework. Dr. Linus has over 22 years of experience in the field of education and has worked directly with over 100 schools, 100 districts, and 4 state departments of education on their implementation of academic and behavioral systems. Previously, Dr. Linus has been the director of Northwest PBIS and a research scientist at the University of Washington. She's also taught courses as an adjunct professor at the UW, Seattle University, and Seattle Pacific. And Cher is a licensed social worker, mental health therapist, and MTSS B and PBIS coach, trauma-informed practices consultant, positive discipline parent educator, and former elementary school counselor. She has degrees in history and social work from Boston University. So welcome, and thank you both for joining us today as we pivoted from our planned in-person conference to the new world of COVID-19, and glad that you were able to help us pull off our first virtual MTSS Fest today. So without any further delay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can put up your presentation. And
I just grabbed it, so it should be coming up.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. It was fun to watch in the chat as people were coming in. There's a lot of familiar faces I know that are joining us from districts that we have worked with in the past or we are currently working with. One piece to link you to is our website, where we have put under our resources tab, the first place you come to is COVID-19 resources. So you'll see a host of things there, including the PowerPoint, which is also linked to us under the MTSS Fest website. I saw in the chat someone was looking for the slides. And then some additional resources that we'll refer to as we go through today. One correction is I've actually worked with over 1,000 schools in 100 different districts. So we've seen this. We know right now, though, that this is something that we haven't seen. And so everyone's in that boat, right, of trying to figure out how is it we want to move forward and what's going to really make the most stable learning environment for kids and for our staff as we come back together in the fall. I think we're seeing some pretty funny things as people start to learn how to homeschool, or, kind of this crisis school, as a lot of my friends are calling it. So I follow the funny tweets that come up. So here's one: been homeschooling for 1 hour and 11 minutes. Teachers deserve to make $1 billion a year or a week. And then homeschool day one, wondering how I can get this kid transferred out of my class. So, which we feel like some days with our 12 and 14-year-old. We're going to really touch on 5 big areas. Know when we touch on this, you could do a full day or 2 days, expanded on any one of these topics. So this is really big ideas and showing you at the end of what it might look like to put this into a 6-week framework. If this is something you're interested in finding out more about and really diving into with your district, please let us know. We'll have our emails up at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Cher. I'm going to present on trauma.
Thank you. So we're going to be talking about moving from trauma awareness and being trauma informed and really putting into action, which is what we really need right now with trauma responsiveness. Again, Lori mentioned these are kind of all-day trainings in and of themselves. We're calling this the tapas plate of presentations on the topic. So just bear with us that these are, we're touching on them pretty briefly today. So trauma is essentially something that our nervous system does not have the psychological capacity to navigate. Trauma is very subjective and relative, meaning what's traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you, and vice versa. And the difference is in our unique nervous systems. As many folks as there are in this presentation, as there are really on Earth, that's how many unique nervous systems there are. And we do cope with our life experiences in really different ways. We don't want to minimize anyone's experience or response to trauma. And that's really important because as we're navigating all of this right now, we're experiencing these things in different ways. And so we want to be sure that we're validating our own experiences as well as the experiences of others. So many of you are probably familiar with the term adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. We know that through a significant amount of research that what we experience in childhood impacts our mental and physical health trajectories in adulthood. The latest ACEs study compared to the first one, which focused mostly on white, middle to upper class, well-educated folks, focused on the broader population and came to some of the same conclusions as the first study, namely that ACEs are common. At least 2/3 of us have at least one ACE. That the higher the ACE score, the more likelihood you are to experience these negative, in mental and physical and health. And although it's really important to note that even just one ACE can be enough to kind of shift us in those directions of those negative mental and physical health trajectories. Now, the latest ACEs study was a broader representation of the population, which is really important. Again, at least, 2/3 of us have at least one ACE. And then there are certain populations that experience, they have a higher reporting of ACEs. That's our poor, those who experience poverty, our Black, Hispanic, or multiracial folks, and the LGBTQ community. And again, people's trauma, if it's not you experiencing it, it still impacts the entire community. And so it's important for all of us to understand how that impacts our brains and our bodies and what we can do to help students. So for toxic stress, when the stress response is initiated, depending upon the amount, whether it's positive, tolerable, or toxic, our brains and our bodies are bathed in adrenaline and cortisol. Now, a certain amount of adrenaline and cortisol is a good thing. A little hit of that before a big presentation can help you remember the things that you want to say, really activate that hippocampus so that you can recall what you've put together and studied. It's just that when we have too much too often, it becomes an issue. And especially for children, when they don't have an adequate adult support, meaning they don't have that adult buffer, that's when they can experience the really negative effects on their nervous systems, meaning their nervous systems can be on high alert pretty often. So toxic stress, ACEs, trauma, they're a bit of a Venn diagram. They overlap in lots of different ways and can have similar impacts on our nervous systems and brain and body development of especially children. So consider that there's a lot of research, a good amount of research to say that stress isn't the bad guy that we make it out to be, that it's how we are, what our mindset is around stress that has the most impact on how it affects our brains and our bodies. So really it boils down to mindsets, meaning what stories do we have? What's our wiring around how we navigate stress? What is our self-talk? What are our interpretations of our experiences? That has a really high impact on how we experience stress. We know that there are a few things that can really protect us from those negative mental and physical health trajectories, meaning can kind of shift us away from them. One being resilience. So resilience factors create a buffer zone for us and can help protect us from those trajectories. We know that some people are born in circumstances that facilitate resilience. But most importantly, we know that resilience can be developed. It's a skill like any other social and emotional skill, and we can create that through social connection, focusing on wellness of our minds and our bodies, building our own social and emotional skill set, not just focusing on the students that we're teaching and their social and emotional learning, but on our adult social and emotional learning as well. Second, we know so much more about the brain. So the next slide, Lori, that including that we can essentially rewire our brain through healing and personal growth. And that should give us a lot of hope for ourselves and our students, meaning what we're experiencing now, if it does have a negative impact on our ability to learn and to grow, we know that we can provide support for our students that can help shift that, and we can rewire our own brains even as adults and help rewire the kids' nervous systems as well. So we want to make sure that we're really focusing on our own resilience, being intentional about focusing on that, as well as the resilience of our students and their families. So we're going to be touching briefly upon 3 components of trauma responsiveness. Lori is going to, the numbers got switched. That happens sometimes when we shift formats. Lori's
number 1. It's all real important.
Yeah, 1 and 3, and I'm going to focus on what's supposed to be number 2, support for the development of self-regulation, which is not just what our students need, it's definitely what we need as adults as well. So I'm going to be speaking mostly to social and emotional learning and creating emotional safety. And Brene Brown has a quote that it's new. It's in her latest podcast, which I highly recommend, her new podcast series. But she said that transformational leaders and teachers have a deep understanding of their own emotional landscape and the landscape of others. We know that kids learn by observation, repetition, and imitation. So they're watching us often. And so we need to make sure that we're modeling and teaching these skills to our students. So I'm going to walk you through some basic steps to healthy emotional processing, and then explain how you can use that in a school context to help students develop self-regulation. So I want you to consider this. We spend a lot of time and energy focusing on teaching kids the steps to a whole host of academic skills, yet we don't often explicitly teach our students one of the most foundational skills to mental and physical well-being, which is healthy emotion processing, or how to navigate uncomfortable emotions. And that really needs to change. So we're going to be speaking on self-regulation today, which essentially means the ability to act in desired ways regardless of our emotional state, which is something that as adults we are absolutely working on. Yes. So first we're going to start with the first step for healthy emotion processing. And again, as I'm teaching these to you, You can be taking notes, you're gonna have access to the slides, and then at the end, I'm gonna touch upon how you can actually teach this to your students or with your colleagues in the building context. So first, we wanna pause and check in with ourselves. Again, remember that, you can flip back for a second, Lori, sorry. Thank you. Remember that what this stress and trauma we may be experiencing right now really impacts our nervous systems and its ability to self-regulate itself. And so we want to make sure that we're intentionally, explicitly following these steps right now so that we can have less wear and tear on our nervous systems when we come out of this, and we're going to have our nervous systems hopefully in the state of being ready to learn. So first we want to pause and check in with ourselves. My pause button is deep breaths, right? We can do that anytime. We want to make sure that we're not reacting, that we're responding wisely, and pausing and taking some deep breaths can really buy us time and get our nervous systems in a state of receptivity, okay? The second step is naming it to tame it, which is a phrase that if you're using a social emotional learning curriculum, you might be quite familiar with. But there are a lot of studies to show that even as adults, we don't have a broad vocabulary for identifying our own emotions as well as emotions in other people. We kind of stick with the same 3 to 5 emotions instead of really broadening that vocabulary and properly identifying what we're really feeling. So it's important to name it to tame it. Also, because feelings are information, they're signals from our brains that we need to pay attention to. If we don't validate the experience and say, hey, I see you, anxiety, however you want to say that in your self-talk or out loud, then your brain's going to keep intensifying that emotion and it's going to get really uncomfortable. So when you can identify the emotion, it's going to allow your brain to kind of let it go and move on through the rest of the steps for healthy emotional processing. So be sure to name it using a feelings chart, something that I really love. And we're going to show an example on the next, here we go. This is one of my favorite feelings charts. You can just find it on the internet if you Google emojis feelings chart. Having it at home, in your classroom, whatever setting that you work in, and checking in with yourself throughout the day. If tuning into your internal world, again, thinking in the context of you practicing these skills and then modeling and teaching them to students, if you are tuning into your internal world frequently throughout the day, doesn't have to be just when you're uncomfortable, checking in with yourself, how am I feeling right now? Having this chart or something similar as a prompt is going to help you really broaden that vocabulary, increase your capacity to identify your emotions and navigate them in the best possible way for you, okay? The third step is feel-good plans. Now, admittedly, I came up with that name when I was an elementary school counselor working with kindergartners. You can call it whatever you'd like, a bliss list. But essentially, this is a list of things that you can think, say, and do to soothe your nervous system. There are 3 things that should be on everybody's feel-good plan. Deep breaths, because when we're in our amygdalas, when we're in that uncomfortable state in our limbic systems, our bodies send oxygen out to our arms and legs, our extremities, in order to allow us to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the 4 kind of amygdala responses that we have when we experience danger or perception of danger. And so we need to be intentional about bringing the oxygen back to our center, back to our brain. So deep breaths should be on everybody's feel-good plan. Movement. There's so much fantastic research out there that says that our brains and our bodies are wired for movement. So dance in your kitchen, hula hoop, go for a walk, whatever it is that you enjoy and you're going to do, please do that, because your brain needs that, especially if anxiety is a type of that buzzy energy that you tend to experience. Movement can be really helpful for moving that energy through your body. The third thing that should be on everybody's feel-good plan is helpful self-talk. It's really in our self-talk that we create either mountains out of molehills or molehills out of mountains. So we want to be really, really conscious about what stories we have going on in our minds. Checking in with ourselves and knowing that every human superpower is to master our thoughts and control. Now, we have automatic thoughts that come in. We have that wiring that shows up. But when we're aware of it, we have that opportunity to shift it to something that's more helpful for us. So these are some examples of feel-good plans. On the far left, That is an educator's feel-good plan. Elle's plan, she's 14, so a teenager. There's my feel-good plan. And then on the far right is my son's. He's a senior and has had to use his feel-good plan an awful lot since this whole thing has gone down, because he is really missing out on a lot of his senior year and senior excitement stuff. So having a feel-good plan, posting it at a place with your feelings chart, again, for students, having one in the classroom, one for school, having one at home, because there's obviously different things that you can do at school and at home, is really, really helpful. And a reminder, we can use this tool, a feel-good plan, as a both reactive and proactive strategy. So here's the thing, we need to be relieving the pressure on our nervous systems throughout the day. So we should be doing feel-good plan stuff throughout the day, right? We should be moving our bodies. We should be checking in with our feelings and our self-talk, connecting with folks, whatever it is, listening to music, whatever it is that's on your feel-good plan, doing that throughout the day so that our nervous systems don't kind of get built up and then we reach a tipping point where we say and do from our amygdalas, which can be really unhelpful. So that's how you can use it as a proactive strategy. If you are teaching a new concept at school that you know is going to be challenging for some students or all students, you can say, hey, we're going to take a few minutes, pick something from your feel-good plan. I recommend helpful self-talk. You know, say something that's helpful, like this might be hard, but I can do it, or I can ask for help. And that's going to get their nervous systems, those who are feeling anxious about this new challenge, can get them in a better state for learning. Reactively, depending on your age group that you work with, you can use this as noticing off-task behavior. Hey, friends, I'm feeling pretty frustrated. A lot of you are off task. It looks like we need to take a few minutes to use your feel-good plan. I'm going to take deep breaths and use some helpful self-talk. I need that right now. What are you going to pick? Giving them an opportunity to take a few minutes, get their nervous systems back to baseline, and then be ready to learn again. So there's lots of different ways that you can use this strategy. And again, self-regulation is foundational for kids being able to learn. Even if they're not having big externalizing behaviors, those students who have really internalizing behaviors may be experiencing depression and anxiety. That can also, they're still in their amygdalas and they're still going to have a difficult time picking up the instruction that you're giving them if their nervous systems don't have an opportunity to downregulate. This is also a really great strategy for students to have at home. So helping them develop one where they can use it at home as well is really, really helpful. So we've got our 3 steps so far. We've got pausing and checking in with ourselves so we don't react, we respond wisely instead. We want to name our feeling and validate it. And then we're going to use feel-good plan or bliss list, whatever you'd like to call it. And then finally, the last step is to problem solve or set boundaries. And I'm going to just circle back because I realized I forgot to say the 2 things that should not be on anybody's feel-good plan. 2 things. 1, vices. So we don't want to put shopping or gambling or substances or anything like that on our feel-good plans because we want this to be a go-to strategy. Again, we're taking this in and building the skill ourselves so we can model and teach it. So vices, don't put those on the feel-good plan. And then this is a very unpopular one with most teens, but they can handle it. That is screens. So there's too much research to show that our brains, our nervous systems are way too active on screens. And so, you know, using social media or binge watching Netflix as a way to manage uncomfortable emotions is not actually helping us process and move them through our nervous system. It's just distracting us. So we want to make sure that we pick strategies that actually soothe our nervous system through and through, and it's not this kind of faux sense or surface sense of soothing the nervous system. So vices and screens shouldn't be on anybody's feel-good plan unless you're using an app like Headspace or Calm or YouTube channel that is teaching you a skill that you can use outside of being in front of that screen. Those are the only kind of loopholes. Go Noodle, that sort of thing, if you're in elementary level. So finally, problem solving and or setting boundaries. Sometimes we have emotions that just tend to move through us once we use our feel-good plan, not much to pay attention to. Other times we really do need to problem solve. And now that our nervous system is calm, we're able to be in that space where we can problem solve. So whenever we're dealing with students who are having challenging behavior, it's really important to keep in mind that they are not in the space to problem solve if their nervous system is still dysregulated. So we need to make sure that they are back to calm before we can problem solve, make a repair, that sort of thing. So we want to keep in mind when we're problem solving and setting boundaries that we've never experienced anything like this before. We just really won't know the effects of this on adults and kids for a very long time. And so it's really important to be thoughtful and compassionate with yourself and with kids and their families. When thinking of setting boundaries, we want to think kind and firm. Sometimes we're too kind, sometimes we're too firm. We need both together to be able to set boundaries in a healthy way. We want to make sure that we're using evidence-based best practices for solving problems and setting boundaries. And of course, we want to make sure that we, again, don't minimize people's experiences that they're having now, that we validate them, and that we allow platforms for everyone to have a voice about what this has been like for them and how we can best support them. So Lori's going to take it away real quick. Just if you're teaching the feel-good plans, the best way to do that is just to brainstorm, whether you're going to do that in a staff meeting with colleagues or with your students, however you're interacting with them at this point. You're going to brainstorm ideas and then give everybody time to make their own feel-good plans, and then again encourage them to post them as a visual so that they can be reminded to implement that tool and practice it as often as possible. So thank you.
Yeah, perfect. So one of the things when we're thinking about coming back, and I know a lot of you, because you're joining as an MTSS interest, are already working on that 3-tier modeling. And I really want you to think about next year when people are coming back after this break, that you think about supersize. You want to supersize up that predictability and consistency. One of the biggest keys in there is anchored into really teaching those school-wide expectations, what those look like in the classroom, and what those look like for every single routine and transition that kids are going to go through. When we see behavior problems in schools, one of the big factors around that is there's unclear expectations for students. They really don't know what's expected of them and how to demonstrate those expectations, or they lack the skills. So there's those social emotional learning skills that Cher was talking about that are tied to your expectations. So this is a great time to go through, if you have one of those behavior matrices that help you plan how to teach in every setting or across different routines in classrooms. Look at the skill that the matrices is pointing to and ask yourself, especially those of you in elementary, do my kindergartners and first graders have the social emotional learning skills to actually follow these expectations? And if not, you've got to stop and develop those with your students, right? So there's a lot of skill building that goes in. That's why teaching expectations is not something that we do in an assembly on the first day and we forget about it. You really want this in consistently across the first 3 to 4 weeks. And you want to be monitoring, and once your students show proficiency, then you want to, you can start to lessen the amount of time you're doing that. And you've got to then layer in that 5-to-1 of positive to corrective praise for kids showing those expectations, right? There's the corresponding staff expectations that come with those. And so what are the staff expectations? So if I want my students to be lined up and ready to go in from recess, for example, I need my staff out there ready to pick the kids up right on time. So there's also staff. So if you haven't gone through and developed out what are the corresponding staff expectations, that's a great piece to think about as well. The other big piece that we'll spend a little more time on is the idea around school connectedness and relationships. And there's some additional resources on our website around school connectedness, relationships, around doing connectedness now with your staff, with your students online, and ways to do that, restorative circle prompts and ideas that are on our website that you can access. We know there's a huge link between relationships, that connectedness, that psychosocial safety that a kid feels within the building, and problem behaviors that we'll see, grades, test scores going up, right? So there's large research behind why it is we need to spend time. This is not something we should assume that teachers automatically know how to go in and do. We really have to be intentional and make time for this to happen across the first couple of weeks of school, and to revisit it often with students, and not assume that it's something that's happening right now with our staff. So some strategies around increasing school connectedness. Really thinking about, when I think about these strategies, this starts with the adults. So those of you who are on that are the administrators in your buildings or your districts, you've got to start this connectedness with your adults, because the adults need to feel connected and bought into that teaching environment, because then they're going to turn around and really do that at a high level with their kids. So we want to make sure. We also need to remember that for a lot of our kids, that school is the most stable part of their day. And so we need to really ramp up and make sure that across all of our schools, we don't have classrooms where kids go in and because the adult doesn't have that emotional regulation, we don't know if the adult's going to raise their voice at the kids, be reactive to the kids. We're trying to create that predictability at a very high level for our students. One of the best things to go back and examine is across all classrooms, have you really built in those classroom management skills that are linked with your PBIS processes? If that's something you're wanting to find out more about, we can share with you fidelity tools that help you to check if those pieces are in place. The other big piece related to school connectedness then is high rates of relationship building. And this relationship building is the responsibility of everyone in every setting across the day. I talk to schools a lot when they're setting up their PBIS systems. One of the most critical people in the relationship building are your front office staff, because oftentimes that's who our adults interact with the most. It's when our families walk in late, often feeling frazzled and stressed out already, that if that person is not the warm and greeting person for that student, those parents, right? If the student walks in and the office staff says, "Oh, great, you're late again," that's very different than, "Hey, it's so good to see you. We're so glad you made it in today," right? So there's a difference in how we're presenting. Everyone in our school with that relationship building needs to tie those pieces to those expectations. So your cafeteria workers, your janitorial staff, everyone needs to know what those expectations are and be promoting that while they're building relationships with their kids. When we think about some of these strategies, right, I like to think of this big, and I actually steal this from one of my coworkers down in the Santa Rosa School District's case at Ennemark, connection before content. We really have to spend the first few weeks. And sometimes when we tell schools, let's not worry about the academic content for the first 3 weeks, they have a hard time kind of picturing that and letting go of that. But if we front load all of this work, we will have an abundance of time back for teaching those academics and really having kids engaged in what we want to teach them. So hyper focus the first 6 weeks. I want to know every student by their name, their strength, and their need. And so we're doing a lot of relationship building. Of course, our community building restorative circles are a great way to do that. Not all restorative processes happen in a circle, right? So this is, you know, if you're on with George Sagai, this is about that greeting kids at the door every day. it is about all those little activities that we stop to do to get to know kids across the day. For our kids that we struggle to build connections with, and remember, for our kids who have been really impacted by this trauma, a lot of times their guardrails go up against building relationships with adults. And so using something like the 2x10, which is just where I make a commitment to take 2 minutes a day for 10 days to focus on relationship building with the student. And that's getting to know that student, not about their academics, but who that kid really is. And it could be 1 minute at the first part of the day and 1 minute later in the day. But I really want to try to do 2 minutes a day for 10 days as a kind of a tier 1.5 strategy if we're not connecting. When we think about all of these pieces, right, and we go back to that relationship building, I want to kind of walk you through then, what does that look like if I'm actually trying to put this together across a 6-week plan? And this is, you know, I say this is a starter template because you're going to take and change this based on what you already do in your school, based on your social emotional learning curriculum, other pieces that you have. But look just at week 1, right? So our week 1, again, one of our big things is, are we teaching the school-wide and classroom expectations across areas? Often day 1 in our schools, they're doing what I would call an expectation rodeo, where they take kids across to different settings all through the school. So the kids stop in the cafeteria and learn what it looks like to meet those expectations. They stop in the hallway. For elementaries, you're rotating around with your classroom. For secondaries, I'll often see where it's like science department, you're going to step out and teach the hallway expectations when kids get into your science classrooms, right? But we want to make sure there's a system where we're taking out the guesswork that this is happened and kids have been taught. So the systems piece of multi-tiered systems is what allows the adults to carry out the practices with the kids. So we're building those systems. And then you can see we're doing a lot of relationship building. Things like class charters, if you're familiar with, and this is really where we're saying as a group, what do we want our classroom to look like? And so you do this, if you're secondary, you do it with every single class period across the day. Or what are some of our agreements that we want to come to as a group? We really want to emphasize in all of this, things aren't being done to kids, they're being done with kids. So this is about student voice in the process. You want to be thinking about things like your community building circles. So if you're using something like responsive classrooms, where they have the morning circles built in every morning for students. If you're secondary, and a daily circle might feel like a lot unless you have an advisory. So sometimes schools shift their schedules to make room for more of these things to happen. But it could be every Monday morning, have first period classes run a check-in circle with their kids. So we carve out some of that time. And then we're building in strategies. Are we teaching kids about mindfulness, about how to self-regulate, self-calm, tools that are available in the classroom, like a calm down space? And then you can see for elementaries, we would also suggest that structure for the first few weeks in recess help reduce a lot of those problems and kind of teach kids how to do recess well in a structured manner. So having organized games out there that they can, and then talking about where it's not that we're not talking about our academics, we're going to introduce our academic goals, but we're not jumping into a lot of the contents around that community building. Each week is meant to build upon the next week. So you can see in week 2, I'm still doing a lot of those same pieces, but now I'm layering in another. And so here you can see, I might be putting in my feel-good plans that Cher talked about. We might be learning about zones of regulation. I'm starting to do some diagnostic academic work where I'm looking for some of those initial skills to start to see where my kids are coming in at. You can see in week 3, I'm starting to really build in more of my formal SEL lessons. ideally, we're going through those academic enabling SEL skills first. Things like, do I know how to show my listening skills, ignore distractions, things that allow the child to access the academics. We may be introducing things like our bystander programs or something around bullying prevention, and teaching kids how to move through the different academic routines. Do they know how to do partner work, small group work? And we're bringing in those interactive structures, which might be something like a Socratic circle that kids are going into if they're doing Socratic seminar style work. And then you can see as we go through week 4, we're starting to build in, and now we're starting to put in some of the academics, and we're working on some whole class projects that everybody starts to be engaged in within the classroom. We're bringing in things like empathy building, having kids start to do some independent reflections on how they're doing with meeting the school-wide and classroom expectations. We might be bringing in some of those character traits, or if you're doing something like character strong, character dares that are starting each week. And then you can see week 5, here's where I want to also start to do things like my school climate survey with my students and families. How are they reacting to the climate? Are we actually hitting our mark with the positive climate that we want to see? And then you can see in week 6, which is now given my teachers time to really get to know my students, that's where we'd suggest bringing in something like a universal screener for behavior that allows us to look at behavior and social emotional learning skills to see if there's some kids that we may need to move into some tier 2 supports to increase the level of support that we're giving them across the school. So that kind of puts all of these big ideas in place in this sample 6-week plan. We've also put in here some additional resources, just websites that our websites up there, but some other websites we find really helpful for this work. It looks like we've still got probably about 15 minutes where we can go into some questions. So Mark, do you want to bring in some questions that we can answer for members?
Sure, yeah. We have a few in the Q&A box, and if you haven't entered your question yet, there's still some time to do that as we go through these. First, there was a lot of appreciation expressed for both of you and the material you've provided. One question is it a good idea to have our students take an ACEs survey as a tool to identify needed supports? And this is from somebody at an ALE high school.
So I have recently seen Dr. Anda, one of the original doctors on, or one of the doctors on the original ACEs study, speak about using ACEs, the ACEs quiz, as a screening tool. It can be helpful information, but it's not meant to be used to screen kiddos in, because like I mentioned, a student might have one ACE, and that could have such significant impact, such as like the death of a parent or something really significant, that they would need extra supports. But if you're just looking at numbers as far as how many ACEs students have, a kiddo could have 7 or 8 ACEs and actually have plenty of resilience factors as well. So it's helpful information, I would say. And I know that California is moving towards, the new Surgeon General wants to have kids screen for that. It's just how you use that information is really important. We don't want it to become a label for students that they have a certain amount of ACEs, but it can be helpful information if, just for us to look at in combination with lots of other things. So hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked if you could put the slide for week 4, 5, and 6 back on the screen.
Yes, easily. And we have this, it's loaded up on the MTSS site, and it's also on our website as well.
Okay. There's also a question, and maybe this has been answered since then. This question was about 20 minutes ago. Is the 6-week plan for elementary primarily, or what of it transfers to secondary?
Yeah, so this 6-week plan, I mean, you can see there's some things in there that would be a little more elementary level, like doing your structured recess. But this is meant to be one that you can take and really modify, because things like the Character Strong program, although they do have an elementary program, I see it more in secondary than I do in the elementary level. So it's meant to be flexible, but you would take and adjust this.
Okay. The next question, can you touch on using these tools to support attendance and truancy prevention?
Yes, yeah, great question. You know, one of the pieces, and I think this relates back to that school connectedness and relationships. When kids have that effective connection into schools, they're more likely to want to come to school, right? And so some of that around school attendance is also diagnosing the problem a little bit. Oftentimes when my student is younger, if they're not getting to school on time or not coming, it might be a little more work with the parents around importance of getting kids to school, helping them problem solve. Maybe they're not getting to school on time because their car's broken down. They don't have bus fare, right? So we want to think about how can we use like our family advocates and resources around that. Oftentimes for our older kids, there is a little more school resistance going on, and that could be related to academic failure, that could be related to depression. So getting in and trying to figure out what's the thing that's holding that kid back. But the more connected and engaged kids are right from the start by doing these activities, the more they're going to want to come to your school.
Mm-hmm. And I'll add that using something like a feel-good plan, especially if low attendance is due to mental illness, anxiety, depression, or something happening at school that doesn't feel good. Feel-good plan can be a universal, obviously a tier 1 intervention. Hopefully everybody has one, including the adults in the building. But then also really working with the student in the tier 2 realm, kind of smaller groups or even individually, to really develop that skill of self-regulation so they can work on their self-talk about coming to school. What are the stories that they're telling themselves, and what are some self-talk that they can repeat over and over again just to kind of help move them through and get them to school at least, or putting into processes in place to just have them come first thing for a check-in with their favorite adult in the building, and that's how they get to start their day. There's lots of different strategies, but using the feel-good plan, using the resources in the building can really, really help.
Okay. I see multiple questions about screeners. So the questions are generally, what universal screeners have you had good experiences with, and which ones for elementary and secondary? And then there was also a specific question about a behavior screener to recommend.
Yes, yeah. And this is its own webinar, but I would say, and we have some resources on our website, and I'm happy to link. So if people want to email me too, I can link them with some of these screeners. I always want to start with ones that, one, are proven to be valid, but also are free, because right now too, people don't have extra money to spend on additional pieces. One of the ones that we really like is the Student Risk Screening Scale, and it's called the SRSSIE, and there's a website called CI, just like C and then I3T, and it is Kathleen Lane's website that she helps to run, and they have a whole bank of screeners, and that particular screener is on there. She's been the developer of that screener. It's fantastic. It works well for elementary, secondary. It's very fast. In 45 minutes, you can screen your entire classroom. So it's a very efficient screener. We suggest too, the idea with screening is that once we've identified kids, we have interventions built to put them in. So it's important to have some interventions built out for kids to go into when you screen them. The other one I like is one of Clay Cook's, and it's called the, I call it the BISY. I hear people pronounce it different, but it's BEISY. That one's also a great one. And then I also know a couple of districts around here that use the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, the SDQ. And so all three of those are free, and I could link people to more on those. But those are all behavioral related screeners, right? And you would use that data in conjunction with things like your absentee data, your academic data. So looking at screening as a whole child picture.
Okay. I'm also seeing a few questions with a common theme about balancing social emotional aspect and academics. And so one question was, what, especially in your 6-week plan, what's the balance you recommend between social emotional and academics? And then also, how do you respond to district or school leaders that are concerned about the recovery of missed academic instruction from this school year?
Yes, yeah, great questions. You know, if I flip back to these first 3 weeks, a lot of this is really geared towards that connection SEL time. You can see we're starting to do some academic diagnostic work and go through some of those academic routines, but not introducing a lot of academic content, focusing more. And you know, I even talk to secondary teachers who say, if I take the time to really do this well in the first 3 weeks, I can get through more academic content by the time I'm hitting the semester than a lot of my colleagues who don't stop to do this. So it is time bought back in the end. I know there's going to be enormous pressure coming back, you know, to try to get kids caught up. And so how this balance might get skewed, but I also know that, you know, it's one of my colleagues put it the other day. She said, we're going to see a trauma tsunami when we come back in the schools. So we are going to have to take some time to address these as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much research to show that that time is very well spent to invest in that. And then as, you know, the 6 weeks went on, it's fading into more academic focus, still integrating the social emotional, because we don't want to silo that. That is not best practice with social emotional learning. We want to integrate it in the academics. And if there's some need potentially to have some leaders in your buildings or districts to get on board with something like this, we are doing that webinar, the 3-part series where we're diving deeper into these topics. And so you can pass that link along, and I think that can be helpful for getting buy-in from your leaders to implement strategies like this.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There was also a request if you could put the feel good plan slide back up as we're going through some of the questions. That would be appreciated.
Yes, I'll have to zip back through some of these.
And then there are a couple questions I've noticed that are similar, not exactly the same, but I think a common theme. One is how educators can be intentional about setting the groundwork for eventually returning to school while they're still distance learning, especially when the work is asynchronous. And then I think a related question is, what can educators be doing now or be doing differently in engaging families, which might help address toxic stress that could be happening at home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you want to start off with that, share kind of what are some strategies they could be doing at home with kids right now?
Well, I think passing along tools like this, the feel good plans, the healthy emotion processing for families, finding a way to communicate that. If you go to my website, you can find PDFs, one for parents, one for individuals, and one for educators that walk you through this process. I have some tips on how to view behavior as communication and a skill. Just really putting these tools in front of families that they can practice right now. There's even a video tutorial that can walk you through as families how to use that you can pass along. But any way that you can just stay connected in any possible way, that a lot of the strategies can still be used. that when you're doing this virtually. So 2x10, how can you get to know your students in a different way during this time? Making sure that as educators, we remember that we still need to be boundaried for ourselves, meaning holding office hours, not available 24/7, so that we protect our own energy while we're navigating this, because not only are we worried about our students and families, we're also experiencing this ourselves, and we need to keep that in mind so that we can increase the bandwidth on our own nervous systems by practicing these strategies and then sharing them with families. Do you have anything to add, Lori?
Well, and just that we've got some resources up on the website too for supporting families during this time.
Yeah.
But if there's particular things too, if you get on our website and you don't see something you're looking for, please reach out to us.
Yeah.
Mark warned me against that because he said I might get 500 emails. But we want to make sure you get whatever support you need.
Check the websites first, and then if you don't see something that would be helpful, because we did put together right when this happened a newsletter with tips for families and for educators. So there are a lot of resources on the Sound Supports website.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We've had several requests for different slides. I want to remind people that a copy of the presentation is available on the MTSS Best website, so that's one way you can revisit some of the material. People wanted to make sure that it's okay for them to share this material with their districts and colleagues.
Yes.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
There were people asking if you want to put up, probably the best thing if you have a slide with your website on it, and we can also, if one of you wants to paste that in the chat as well. A lot of people are asking for your websites and the resources that you're referring to.
Yeah, I just have to flip here to the end.
Mm-hmm. And so for mine, and I put it in but I don't know if the chat goes to everybody, Sound Supports K-12. That's where you're going to find a lot of the resources that Lori's mentioned. And then shareanderton.com is my website where you can find the PDFs on the healthy emotional processing and feel good plan information that you can share with families.
Okay. There's a question about resources that might be available in multiple languages. Do you have anything to share regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, if a resource is out there and we find it and it has been translated, we definitely make sure and put that up. But I would say a lot of our stuff that we've just built out, like around this, is not translated at this point.
Mm-hmm. You might need to use your own kind of district resources potentially for translation to get to families. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, I'm kind of going through, we just have a couple minutes left. A lot of people have been asking for websites and resources, which we just provided and talked about now. Let's see if there's, do you have any suggestions for staff PD that we can be doing in preparation for return, books to read together, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, we kind of mentioned at the start of each of those 5 big areas that we just did, as Cher said, the top is played on. You could spend time doing staff professional development around. So several of our districts that we're working with, we're lining this out where we're doing deeper staff professional development for their districts around a variety of these topics. One, just thinking about some of the structure pieces. George had put this up if you were watching the keynote, but the MTSS book that Kent McIntosh and Steve Goodman does a great job of laying out kind of that predictability and structure piece. I'm trying to think about some of the better ones too around SEL and connections. I feel like I want to turn around and look behind me at my bookshelf. One of the great ones I'll grab really quick. Actually, I see 2 that are a little more related around the restorative, but I think also building the community building. One's called the Circle in the Square. And that's Nancy Riestenberg. If someone wants to type that into the chat while I hold it up, the Circle in the Square. The other one that's fantastic, it's by Martha Brown, is on creating restorative schools. But when I think about restorative schools, I think about connected schools. I think about schools that really do a good job putting an eye on that social emotional learning. So those are two great summer reads that your staff could go through.
I guess maybe one final question. We're about out of time, so if you have a brief answer, I think the gist of this question is this 6-week plan going to be shared with districts broadly? Or I think kind of within that question is how do we have conversations with our districts as educators about how to shift from kind of the normal expectations of starting to a plan like the one that you laid out?
Yeah. I mean, so we have posted that. If it's a district that we work with, we're certainly sharing this and suggesting that they put a little bit of the pause button on as they start back and really do some shifting around this work. I think because most of the districts we work with are engaged in MTSS, they already have that. You know, they have that lens already, and they're already thinking about it and talking about it. So.
Okay.
And you can also find, just real quickly, that Sound Supports is on LinkedIn too, if you're on there, and you can access us that way as well.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Lori and Cher. There were probably 30 more questions that came in just the last few minutes, so I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but you've seen their email, and the website and email is available in the materials that are posted on the MTSS Fest website. And so I just want to remind everyone, I have the link here up on your screen that through the registration and agenda links, you can access all the presenters' materials. So even for sessions that you weren't able to attend today. Lori and Cher are happy to receive questions directly, but also if you have other questions, you can direct them to the Center for the Improvement of Student Learning, CISL, at k12.wa.us. And again, I posted information in the chat, but if those of you who are concerned about getting clock hours, if you enrolled through PD Enroller as well as registering on Zoom, you should be good to go. But if you only registered for the Zoom meetings but didn't go through PD Enroller and you want clock hours, you want to make sure you do that by the end of the day today. So thank you again, Lori and Cher, for your presentation. And obviously people are very interested and hungry for the information that you provided today. And I hope that anybody who didn't get their questions answered today will follow up either with you or with OSPI. And I want to thank everybody for attending today and for all of your questions as well. And we're going to be ending the meeting, and a recording of this, if you want to go back to it or share it with colleagues or use it as part of your professional development, will be available starting on May 4th through the OSPI website on the MTSS webpage.
Yeah, great.